Joining us right now. We will officially get started. Is everyone ready?
Yes.
Yeah.
Wonderful. I'm sure we'll still have some people joining us as we go. Thank you, everyone, for being here. As the message in the chat indicates, this is a webinar format. This is an event hosted by Ponars Eurasia, and the four of us, are members of the Ponars Ukraine Task Force that seeks to have academic experts in the conversation about current events and policy relevant issues related to Ukraine. And so we've organized this webinar today at especially what for academics is a rather last minute organization. As I said just a moment ago, if you know anything about academics, we don't tend to do things very quickly. It's not our style. It's not really what we're trained to do. But this is such an important time for Ukraine and has been such an important few days that we feel it's important for people with expertise to be part of the conversation, to have Ukrainian scholars speaking to what's happening right now and what's happened just in the past 5 days. The world has seen some really tremendous events happening. And so the intent here is a kind of academic fact-checking and reactions and initial analysis to where we are now and what's happening right now with Ukraine. Because this is a webinar format, you can use the Q&A function on this webinar format to ask questions. We're going to reserve at least 20 minutes at the end of this hour-long session specifically for questions. You are welcome to submit questions as we're speaking, and we may address those as we can as those are coming in. You won't be able to post in the chat, but you can use the Q&A function to communicate with us. So with those preliminaries out of the way, I'd like to introduce who we have here today to talk with all of us and help us make some sense of the world. We have Professor Volodymyr Dubovik, who is an associate professor at the Department of International Relations and the director of the Center for International Studies at the Odessa Mechnikov National University in Ukraine. He's conducted research at the Kennan Institute, at the Woodrow Wilson International Center for Scholars, and at the Center for International and Security Studies at the University of Maryland, and has taught at the University of Washington and St. Edward's University and the University of Texas, Austin. We also have Professor Volodymyr Kulik, who is a professor at the Kyiv School of Economics. He's one of Ukraine's key experts on language policy, national identity, and media discourse. And for almost 27 years, he's worked as a senior researcher at the Institute of Political and Ethnic Studies of the National Academy of Sciences of Ukraine. We also have Mikhail Alexeyev, who is a professor of political science at San Diego State University, where he's taught since 2000 and served as the Bruce E. Porteous Chair. His research focuses on threat assessment in interstate and internal wars, ethnic relations, nationalism, and immigration in Russia and Eurasia, and he is currently concentrating his work on Ukraine's democratic resilience in the face of Russia's military invasions since 2014. And I am also one of the panelists. I will be primarily moderating, but also contributing as appropriate. I'm an associate professor at the University of Colorado Boulder in the Department of Political Science. I've been traveling to the region regularly since 2002, and my research has focused on Ukraine since 2022, since the full-scale invasion. So our format is that we have several general questions that I'll pose, and then each respondent will give an answer of a few minutes. I will try to make sure that we're rotating so that we're all speaking in conversation, so it's not one of us giving a lecture as all of us are inclined to do, but so that we can get as much information and questions and conversation in this short time as possible. So the first question that I have is the most broad question, the most general question, which starts with the events of just this past Friday. And that is, what are the consequences of the Oval Office confrontation for Ukrainian politics and society? And we haven't discussed order, so who would like to go first with this very big, broad question?
Let
May I?
Volodya do that. Yeah, Volodya, yeah.
Okay, thank you. So, s- since I'm in Ukraine, I can observe it more directly than some of us who are in San Diego and Boulder. Yeah. Although in the age of social media, most of what we observe is on social medias, which are available anywhere. Anyway, what I observe here is remarkable consolidation of Ukrainian society, at least of an active part of Ukrainian society. Yeah, so there is some indication that society as a whole has become more supportive of consolidation and war effort and more supportive of what President Zelensky is doing in the recent days. But mostly, there is already some survey data, very preliminary, maybe not nationally representative, but there is already some data. More clearly, we can say that the active part of society, those with a more loud and more influential voice, are very supportive of what President Zelensky has been doing, very appreciative of the effort of our European partners, very regretting of the unfortunate turn that the U.S. politics, U.S. administration's attitude toward Ukraine is taking, and resolute to continue supporting Ukrainian effort to resist Russia's aggression as long as it takes. So it seems to be trivial, but it is not, because Ukraine is a vibrant democracy, even at wartime, and support for what president is doing is by no means guaranteed. And unlike the first months of the war, when we had this usual rally around the flag effect of consolidation and support for the government, later on, war fatigue set in, frustration with how long the war is going, how little advance Ukrainians are making on the front line, and concern about how long we can withstand. Yeah. So then there was somewhat less consolidation and somewhat less support for the government. Now this consolidation is back. So in a way, Trump's attack on Ukraine served not exactly as much, but somewhat like what Putin's attack on Ukraine in 22 did.
It created a sense of unity then
Yes,
that
yes,
that had been waning.
sense of being attacked, and thus a sense of unity, and the need for unity and ability to unite, and ability to withstand.
That's really interesting that it created this with the same sense of being attacked that had happened before. Mikhail Alexeyev or Volodymyr Dubovik, would you
Sure.
like to step
Yeah,
in?
I was going to say that your question is so important. The role of Ukrainian society in any kind of geopolitical developments, in any kind of diplomatic efforts, in any kind of international interactions around this issue. We saw what happened when Ukrainian society was underestimated. The former US intelligence officials and others often claimed success by predicting that Russia would invade Ukraine militarily on a large scale. And often they said, our intelligence was very good. But unfortunately, there was another side to these assessments. And the other side to these assessments was that Ukraine would fold very quickly within a couple of weeks. And the problem with that assessment was that they did not factor in Ukrainian society. They did not factor in the commitment to independence and freedom among Ukrainians. And because they didn't factor it in, they didn't believe that they didn't need to assist Ukraine very much. And so Ukraine then faced the well-predicted military invasion without much international assistance that could have even sent a signal to Putin not to invade. And I'm afraid that right now, this very massive effort by the Trump administration, of which that exchange in the Oval Office was just a tip of the iceberg, also misunderstands, or I can even coin this word, misunderestimates the Ukrainian society. There's now a lot of talk that Zelensky should step down because he doesn't want peace, but it's not about peace. Zelensky sees that the administration's push for peace de facto would mean Ukrainian surrender, and the Ukrainian society is not going to accept surrender. That's why we again have to factor Ukrainian society into account. And if we look at, say, opinion data that I've been tracking, you see that it would be a losing proposition for any leader to try to push the Ukrainian society to simply accept even the status quo, let alone to give Putin more territory that he already controls, which Moscow demands. And therefore, all these efforts could only lead to frustration. They can lead to lengthening the conflict. They can lead to making it harder, and the suffering to continue. And so the Ukrainian society is very strong in terms of its commitment to freedom and independence, and that, I think, is the foundational thing here.
I'm glad to hear both of these because this is a much more optimistic assessment. I know that Volodymyr Dubovik will be weighing in right now as well. But there has been a lot of concern expressed as well about what happened and what's happened since. Although Volodymyr Dubovik, I wanted to make sure that you have a chance to
Right, thanks. And actually, by the way, I was about to send you a message, but I can tell right now that I think that you may think about merging some of the questions. But it's up to you. I think that 2 and 3 could be one question, and then 4 and 5 could be one question. Very briefly, because people said already enough, but it's important that it's not about Zelensky. I think it's about Ukraine. And what people saw in the White House meeting last Friday was that Ukraine was humiliated, or at least it was an attempt at humiliation. That Ukraine was neglected, discarded. That they didn't want to talk about Ukraine's interests and Ukraine's future. And that's what really generated the response. Some people don't understand it's not about Zelensky. Some people really think it is about him. Some in administration said that some personal convictions or interests lead Zelensky to drag this war out more and more. And that he wants to prolong the war. That's not true. He really reflects thinking of Ukrainian society. We don't want the peace by any means. We don't want the peace that will be dictated by Kremlin, because we could have stopped the war and accept Russia's conditions at any point. We wouldn't have to fight for 3 years and lose so many lives and so much destruction if we just wanted to accept the Russian conditions for the peace, quotation marks. So therefore, I'm not very optimistic going forward, because there is still a huge gap, but we'll talk about it later maybe, huge gap between how Trump sees going forward with the peace deal and what Ukraine needs. Despite what Zelensky said in his latest statement today, I don't think this would really resolve all the issues that we have ongoing between Washington and Kyiv.
I think you're right. We can absolutely combine some of the pre-planned questions that we had for today, because I think in the first one, we've already touched on several of them. I'm curious what all of you think about the shift in European politics and European support for Ukraine. And you can decline to answer any of these questions, which are admittedly maybe kind of impossible questions, but how does it change European support? Can European support replace American support for Ukraine? And maybe we can delve more into how it changes how Ukraine can and will fight the war. So I know there was mention of how it would extend fighting, what the Trump administration is doing now. Volodymyr, you had your hand up already.
Yeah, I mean, if I may, I know I was the last one to speak, but I'm really an IR guy, so that's something I have to address. First of all, of course, if U.S. is going AWOL and turning its back on Ukraine, it's going to be much more difficult for Ukraine to continue to fight. And Trump is aware of that. In his cynical way, he said, with us, you have a chance and you have a cards. If we are out, you'll fight it out, and it's not going to be pretty. I think I'm quoting. And also, he said, we're not going to be in the side of Ukraine. So it was a very fast transformation for U.S. From ally and partner to kind of neutral for a few days. If you look at the voting in the United Nations, U.S. decided not to even mention who is waging a war on who and who is the aggressor and who is the victim, to basically siding with Russia now. I mean, unfortunately, we find U.S. in many ways on Russia's side. Together, Russia and U.S. are pushing and squeezing Ukraine to agree to break Zelensky and break Ukraine and retain and take away our agency, and turn Ukraine into object that you can talk directly to Russia above the heads of Ukrainians and Europeans. And here comes Europe, because Europe is really troubled by these developments. Of course, they're not buying the suggestion from Washington that we would sign a deal with Russia. It would actually affect all of you. And then you would have to implement it. You would have to deal with war in Ukraine. You would have to send peacekeepers. You would have to give money and weapons to Ukraine, and so on. But why would Europeans be signing up to this? You're signing a deal which reflects some vision of interests of US and Russia, and then you're left alone with actually pulling it off. Because we do know that Europe actually together collectively gave even more money for weapons and humanitarian assistance to Ukraine than US did. I mean, of course, the US is just one country and Europe is many countries, but we should not neglect what Europe did. What now we're seeing in Europe is really awakening, late awakening, a rude awakening, and they really wasted 3 years of time in terms of addressing issues like military production, military procurement, spending more on defense. Unfortunately, they haven't wasted that time completely, because they actually gave a lot of assistance to Ukraine, but they should have given more. And they now should be serious, because they now see that this is not just about Ukraine, really. It is about European security. It's a threat for them. It's a threat from Russia, but also kind of threat from US now. There's a challenge from US across the ocean. So Europe is stuck between aggressive, belligerent, imperialistic Russia on the one hand. On the other hand, also, kind of neglecting the views of traditional partners and allies, and bit imperialistic, US as well. By the way, if you remember statements about Greenland and Panama and Canada, that's clearly imperialistic, but also realpolitik is here. Political realism is in play, because Trump apparently does believe that, if Russia is a great country and superpower, and look at the map, and Ukraine is just doomed to be stuck there next to Russia. So the natural way of things is Ukraine recognizing Russia's sphere of control, just like smaller countries around US should. So that's unfortunate alignment of ideology and the worldview that we're seeing. And Europe is really troubled. This time around, they're really worried that this was going to be hurting their interests. And I hope from rhetorics they would come up quickly with some measures. What is needed today, quick blueprint for the peace plan, jointly prepared by Europeans and Ukrainians and sent to Washington. Then we'll see what Trump says. Most probably and quite possibly he would say, no, we don't like it, But the problem is that the US doesn't have a peace plan as such. We now are quite aware of that. There is just an understanding that we kind of accept Russian conditions, we squeeze Ukraine, and here's your peace plan. Europe also needs to address the issue of using frozen assets, Russian frozen assets in Europe to pay for things to Ukraine, including buying weapons for Ukraine. And of course, I'm hoping that Europe would be able to buy American weapons to be given to Ukraine if Trump allows that, or elsewhere in the world. So Europe has a lot of soft power still, a lot of money, a lot of ability to influence situation. The weapons, that's a weak point. That's where we actually have some weapons that we need for our forces to continue to fight successfully in this war that only Americans can give. And that's a problem, including air defense, for instance, and other systems, and so on. So here we come. It's going to be difficult to fight the war without US. I hope that the suspension of the existing remaining funds for the military aid, about $4 billion, would actually be unfrozen, and aid would be flowing into Ukraine. I hope so, that they would reconsider. Now, after Zelensky making this, statements trying to repair the relations, but Europe is going to play a huge role. It's not going to be able to substitute the US completely, entirely, but it can partially do that.
So does this mean we're looking at a major escalation where there's more fighting, not just in Ukraine, but perhaps with the other powers? I mean, I want to ask the big blunt questions um, to make some sense of this. Are we looking at an escalation of fighting with the US on the opposite side of European powers?
I don't know if my colleagues want to weigh in here. I think we are. I think we're seeing the changing reconfiguration of the structuring of the world affairs, where the US is in a different role now. The trend around the world, and definitely in Ukraine, is to see US through the prism in the context of what US was standing for in the previous decades under various administrations, Republican and Democrat. But what Trump is doing right now, he is really trying to disrupt and ruin the existing international order. He always said he doesn't like it. He always said the EU is not a friend, even though the EU is based on the principles and values that the same that are for US, it's the same Western civilization. But Trump said, no, EU is an enemy. NATO is unreliable, free riders, and so on. So, democracy is just a hollow sound. I'm not going to just defend democracy against authoritarians because I actually feel more sympathy and affinity, he would say, towards authoritarians and dictators around the world. I get along with them really well, unlike with some traditional European, liberal democratic allies. So yes, I really do see that instead of what Biden was trying to do, especially in the first half of his administration, to bring democracies together fighting authoritarians, there was his big idea. We are seeing something different. We're actually seeing US drifting away from democracy and promotion of democracy and liberal democracy, and he doesn't like any of those terms, and therefore there's going to be a problem eventually, I think, going down the road for US, because from US first, I think we will eventually see US alone, and Trump and Americans would understand that much of their power historically was built through allies and alliances and friends. And if you lose all of that, what are you left with? So that's going to be a problem. And I'm seeing this realignment, which is very unfortunate. And of course, for us in Ukraine, especially, because we depend so much on American aid.
Right. So
May I add?
well, yeah, please.
Coming back to your question about Europe, Trump's thinking, as well as Putin's thinking, is that Europe is weak and Ukraine is weak. Yeah. America is strong, Russia is strong, they believe, but both Ukraine and Europe is weak. And actually, Europe and Ukraine at some point before 22 gave some reasons for such thinking. Yeah, and Europe even until very recently. But whether or not Europe is weak or strong depends on Europe. Not on Trump or not on Putin. Actually, Trump already contributed to, as Volodya just said, Europe's awakening. Yeah, so reconsideration of its role and its strengths. Yeah, so Europe seems to be deciding right now that it doesn't want to be weak. Yeah, it doesn't want to be fully dependent on the US, and particularly on one president of the US. Yeah, which is not very friendly to Europe, which is not very appreciative of what Europe is doing, and who doesn't value Europe as a friend and a partner, who doesn't care either way. Yeah, so Europe it seems to be deciding right now that it wants to be strong. And it wants to be strong together with Ukraine, supporting Ukraine, but also benefiting from Ukraine's war experience. Yeah, so Europe seems to understand right now, which we have been telling them all along, but which few listen to, that it's not about defending Ukraine, it's about defending Europe. Yeah, so now that the US said that they're not going to defend Europe from Russia or from anybody. Yeah, so Europe needs to defend itself, and it seems to understand that the best way to do so is to do so together with Ukraine. Help Ukraine to resist Russia on the front line, which is far eastward from the EU, rather than fight Russia on the eastern border of the EU. Yeah, so to spend more on weapons and economic aid to Ukraine to help Ukraine successfully fight Russia, rather than accept that Ukraine has lost and Russia is empowered and Putin is emboldened, and the front line has shifted tremendously westwards. Yeah, so we don't know yet whether Europe is resolute enough and successful enough to implement that new thinking. Yeah, we don't know what Trump's response to that transformation of Europe will be. Maybe Trump will accept that a strong Europe should be better regarded as a partner. Or maybe Trump will be infuriated that Europe decided to kind of run contrary to what he prepared for Europe. Yeah, and Ukraine decided to behave contrary to what he prepared for Ukraine. So maybe he will even stronger try to kind of push Europe away, prevent Europe from helping Ukraine, for example, by refusing to authorize the purchase or transfer of American weapons to Ukraine. And let's not forget, it will depend on what happens within the US, because Trump is not only fighting democracies in other countries, he is also fighting democracy in the US itself. And we don't know what the response of American society will be, what the response of American political class will be, what the response of American judicial system will be. So right now he is trying to prevent any protest against his authoritarian turn. But we know the U.S. is not exactly Ukraine, which responds to authoritarian turn by going to the Maidan. Yeah, but we still hope that there will be some protest, and this protest, as long as the U.S. remains a democracy, and there will be election in what 18 months from now, we understand that Trump is still constrained. Yeah, Trump cannot do whatever he wants if the society and the political class and business elites do not accept that. So it remains to be seen. But for now, we hope that Europe will continue with this awakening, with this strengthening, empowering trend, and will continue supporting Ukraine to let Ukraine support Europe.
We have a question in the chat that's relevant to this question about European support that you were just speaking about, Volodymyr. Denisa Duvanova says, yesterday Zelensky announced he's still ready to sign the minerals deal with the U.S. What is the domestic and strategic significance of his desire to hit the reset button with Trump? Is it an indication of weak European commitment to support Ukraine? The fact that Zelensky is, and this was one of our questions we came into this with, was like, can U.S.-Ukrainian relations still be reset at this point, given what's happened in the past 5 days? So I see, Mikhail, you've already raised your hand to jump in.
Because partly that question addresses something I wanted to add to the discussion that you started with the question before that, and you asked, about Ukraine holding up without U.S. support. And actually, if you think of the military needs for Ukraine, about 40% comes from within Ukraine, and 30% from Europe, and 30% from the United States. So it's a very large amount, but it's not the majority of military capability that Ukraine has. However, there is a very strong understanding that what the United States provides, others cannot. I would say two critical things right now. One is support for F-16 fighter planes, which help Ukraine tremendously already to ward off the Russian aerial attacks, where they launch glide bombs that are very devastating on the front lines. It's very hard to defend against them once they're launched. That's one issue. The other one is Patriot missiles. While Ukraine has European air defense systems as well, they are not as capable, and only Patriot can actually have been shown to knock down what Putin calls hypersonic Kinzhal missiles. So Russia is ramping up production of Kinzhal. It has ballistic missiles, which Patriot, if Ukraine runs out of ammunition for Patriot, it will be exposed to devastating strikes on major cities. And I believe if we're talking about, so no matter how much Europe, even if Europe wholeheartedly and in a unanimous fashion went in to support Ukraine right now, it will still fall short of providing Ukraine those kinds of capabilities, at least in the short term, at least in the next, 6 months or so. And a lot of damage can be done in that short term. And so I believe the main goal for the minerals deal, which could be beneficial both for Ukraine and the United States, and it could be a good stepping stone for further relations and strategic partnerships and things like that. But I think at a minimum, Ukraine needs the United States to continue military support, which Trump now suspended. And so that is the crucial goal right now. But my fear is that the reason why there was this confrontation on camera was because Trump was unwilling to promise any support, including continuation of the aid that's already going on. And so that I believe is the issue. So maybe Zelensky could agree, for example, to one of Trump's claims that he didn't agree before, that, okay, we will use the minerals deal to actually reimburse the United States for prior assistance. And maybe that would reopen the supply of weapons. But these could be some of those considerations. But whether it would reset the whole relations, I don't see. I can see some transactional resets. It's very hard for me right now to imagine a systemic reset, because I see the whole Trump direction is toward redividing spheres of influence with other powerful actors in the system.
That's a really interesting term, transactional reset. I wonder if that will enter our lexicon as a thing that we refer to, transactional reset. Volodymyr Dubovik, you have your hand up.
Thank you. I mean, if you mean by transactional reset with Russia, I'm afraid we are seeing something else. I'm afraid we're actually seeing some ideological affinity and strategic realignment. If you can remember, Trump actually tried to have some kind of ground bargain with Russia even back in his first term, in his four years of presidency, but then he was prevented from being able to do that due to various investigations of his campaign links to Russia, and the constant attention of people to what he does to Russia and with Russia. But he always liked this idea, and now, of course, he has much less of a guardrails or restraining powers comparing to the previous administration, that he can act on his feelings and his instincts. And the instinct for him is to two great powers, Russia and US, to actually work together. And of course, there is this idea that you can try to soften and improve relations with Russia to tear it away from China and somehow use it against China, who is strategically going forward is a main problem, a challenge for US. But I find this idea actually very naive and based on illusion, because that wouldn't happen. That wouldn't be able to be. They wouldn't be able to achieve it. Unfortunately, I think that Putin knows how to play Trump, so he would promise him whatever, including that, yeah, of course, we'll address the issue of China together when we solve the Ukrainian problem. But going forward, I don't think there will be big benefit and any potential in this particular field. Tactically, as just Misha said, I agree absolutely. Situationally, we can improve relations a little bit with the Trump administration now. If you're Ukraine, if you look at the very last big statement by Zelensky, there you have strong leadership of President Trump. There you have recognition of him being the first one who gave Ukraine lethal weapons, and thank you for the javelins. And there you have many other things. Basically, Zelensky acknowledging that maybe we are ready for some kind of ceasefire indeed. But what he actually puts in the text there is closer to what Europeans suggested. more of several stages of ceasefire. First, starting by stopping, hostilities on the sea and in the air, and then actually going to the ground forces. That's more of a European idea, which emerged, among other things, from the recent Sunday, which is what, day before yesterday, meeting in London. When you mentioned, Sarah, in the beginning that we're going to address what happened in the last 5 days, I was like, can we address what happened in the last 1 or 2 hours? That would also be enough to talk about. So I think the public apology is made if White House would continue to insist on actually Zelensky apologizing even more and on camera and basically saying I misbehaved in the White House. That's unfortunate, and I don't think Zelensky should do it, and I don't think he did anything wrong. Like he said in his interview on the same evening last Friday for the Fox News, I don't think we did anything bad. But that's as far as it comes in this last statement in terms of apology. I think if he apologizes, continue to apologize, that would really undermine Ukraine's position. What really happened is actually in the last few weeks, Ukraine regained some of that agency vis-a-vis US, despite strong pressure from Washington, especially with this minerals deal, rare earth deal, when Zelensky said, I'm not going to sign a document which I just seen the first time in my life, and then he didn't like certain points there, and the document was changed. And that apparently infuriated people in Washington. Yeah. And before that, Zelensky made it known that he has his own vision of how the peace should look like, which is really different from how they understand the peace in quotation marks in the White House right now. And that's also annoyed and irritated people in the White House. And I'm afraid they decided to put him in his place. And that's how this whole thing evolved. So tactically, we can improve relations. Maybe, maybe this kind of apology from Zelensky will be accepted, and we'll probably sign that rare earth minerals deal. But just like Misha said, I'm also thinking that we have longer term problems because there is a huge gap between how Washington sees going forward in terms of peace process and how Ukraine sees it, and Zelensky reflects Ukrainian vision. What's the point of peace if it doesn't really bring peace to us? Not in the longer term. It's not beefed up by any mechanisms. It's not by any security guarantees. So what's the price of that peace? How is that better than Budapest Memorandum or Minsk protocols? We are still at the Russians' mercy. If you just sign something just for the sake of Trump showing a nice piece of paper and saying, see, I've been a president only for a month or two, and I'm already have this great deal. Am I a greatest politician who ever lived or what? But that serves Trump's interest and his ego and ambitions, maybe, but not Ukraine's interest.
We have a large number of questions piling up, so I'd like to actually try to combine some of them and then address some of the topics in the questions, but maybe bringing them together with the perhaps a caveat or warning or tone setting of we are in a period of highly polarized politics, as everyone already knows, and contentious politics. Some of the questions are quite direct, but I think it's important to engage all of the questions in a format like this. There's several questions about policy suggestions going forward. So we have one that is specifically what are some of the policy recommendations that can be made going forward in the war for Ukraine, for Europe, for the US. We have a very pointed question about the USA's responsibility for funding the war and if they should fund it indefinitely. I'm using the words of the commenters here. Indefinitely until the Ukrainian people feel like they have their freedom, or is there a certain point where enough is enough and peace must be made? And so I would combine those two at the very least of sort of what are the policy proposals and kind of what is the U.S. commitment or the U.S. interest in being engaged here. Volodymyr? Or either.
Okay, let me start now. So regarding U.S. responsibility, on one level, U.S. is not responsible for what's happening in Eurasia, for what's happening in Ukraine. And Trump is arguing that there are more important problems. There are migrants, there are drug users and trafficking and economy and whatnot. And that seems plausible. On the other hand, U.S. traditionally assumed, claimed the role of the world superpower, well, the greatest nation on earth. Yeah. So this role is undermined now by Russia's direct challenge to the international order, which the U.S. Has spent so much time building. Yeah, and so it is in the U.S. interest to prevent Russia from ruining that order. Unfortunately, in the last days, it seems like Trump is willingly helping Putin to ruin that order. And Xi Jinping will of course be glad to join in, yeah, to kill that order altogether. But assuming the U.S. still remembers why they wanted that order, why they wanted to be superpower, why they wanted to be extending its sphere of interest well beyond North America. It is in the U.S. interest to contribute to restoration, if not of territorial integrity of Ukraine, but at least of some semblance of world-based, values-based order, norms-based order. Yeah. So if Putin is attacking a sovereign country just because he can, and the U.S. doesn't interfere, the U.S. is weak, and U.S. is no longer that superpower it claimed to be. Yeah. And so Trump says, so what? It's one of the great powers attacking, grabbing a piece of a weak power. So we don't mind Putin doing that because we can do it ourselves. Yeah, but. The U.S. Is still not lost completely in this respect. There are many people in the U.S. political class. There are many influential people in American society who disagree that the U.S. should stand by and actually join in, yeah, in ruining that order. So many people still believe that it is the U.S. vital interest to help Ukraine not to lose this war. And of course, there is a question who should pay more, the U.S. or Europe, and it's a legitimate question. And to force Ukraine, to force Europe chime in, yeah, you know, to assume greater responsibility is a legitimate approach, but not allying with Putin. That is certainly not serving the U.S. interest. So we do not insist that the U.S. takes the approach as long as it takes. So they are willing to pay as long as Ukraine is satisfied with how much they achieved on the ground. But it should be the common understanding of the U.S., European partners, and Ukraine that they have prevented Putin from achieving as much as he wanted. At that point, so there will be an understanding that his attack on this norms-based order is punished somehow. So it's not successful enough for him to want to continue.
May I?
Oh, please. And then we have several questions about international relations I'd like to get back to and combine. But yes,
I think
please.
I was actually going to address that question, the second question that you raised, because I think we should maybe like take a little pause and realize how much we have been speaking about Ukraine's role in potential peace, forgetting that the main factor is not how to convince Ukraine to stop fighting, but how to stop Putin. That is the absolutely quintessential point. Putin could have stopped all wars back in 2014 by simply going on television and announcing that Russia will no longer support those separatist republics. He could stop the war now by going on television and saying we stop fighting, and if Ukraine takes a break, we can negotiate. Right. So if that happened, then we could talk about some serious negotiation and political resolution and concessions on both sides and things like that. But every day, Putin fires 160 to 200 long-range Shahed drones into Ukraine, about 4,000 to 5,000 artillery rounds. about 100 glide bombs weighing from 500 kilograms, half a ton, to 3 tons. That if you think of the damage that is done to Ukraine in terms of TNT equivalent, my guess is it will be comparable to 9/11. Imagine living in the United States and having destruction on the scale of about 9/11 or half 9/11 or something like that every day for the last 3 years. And the other side is the one that can stop it in a minute, right? So that's where the key to peace is. So if we talk about policy recommendations, the only solution that I see is would be a complete turnaround on the Trump side. Let's say he gets completely dissatisfied with Putin, or Putin irks him, or he tries to do some mega deal and he gets frustrated and his ego gets bruised, and he decides to instead use the approach of, say, Ronald Reagan with Operation Ocean Venture, the purpose of which was to use one particular set of capabilities where Russia is weaker than us, which is naval power, and projected around Russia in a way that would demonstrate to the Russian military that they cannot stop us from wreaking serious havoc on Russia, or from us, for instance, blocking North Korean troops being shipped to Russia, or North Korean ammunition being shipped to Russia, or Iranian drones being shipped to Russia. So that would be the kind of policy, if we turned around, that would have the greatest chance of stopping the war soon. And then all kinds of other processes can begin. But until then, I really see a very difficult, very hard, very dark path in the future.
Thank you. We have about 10 minutes and about 20 questions. So I'm going to propose, if our panelists are game for it, that we do a kind of rapid fire response, because we have a very engaged audience. I think it's important to, even if we do so quickly, to address some of the questions that are out there. I know one panelist has already offered to stay past the hour, but I don't know if our attendees can as well, and I don't want to presume that the other panelists can. But is a rapid fire sort of, we'll try it? I'll do some of the questions that I think maybe we could do in this format. We can give short responses and see if we can address many of them. I see one that I just happened to see popped up from Tamila Lankina. Do you think EU and European states would be able to prevent the dismantling of sanctions regimes against Russia, which Trump has been doing?
No, they wouldn't be able to prevent dismantling of sanctions regime of US sanctions. They can still deal with their own sanctions, which are actually more biting and more hurtful for the Russian economy. It was always European sanctions that were more hurtful than American sanctions. In terms of sanctions from the US, we'll see if Trump really means, like it was reported, to actually start taking some of them off and softening the regime. As was reported that he gave an instruction to his government to start looking at what can be done here. Or is it a signal to Ukraine as well as one of those pressure points against Ukraine? Look, not only we are suspending the financial aid, but we're also suspending, we're also thinking of elevating sanctions. There have been reports even about America's now thinking about restoring Nord Stream 2. Before that, of course, US stopped supporting the project that is to help Ukraine with energy infrastructure and so on. So there have been many, many, many signals in the last few days.
Okay.
I guess it's not rapid fire.
So that's okay. It's against our very training to give rapid fire answers. Against the very academic training. There's been a question for a while from David Cannon. I apologize for mispronouncing your name likely. Assuming the emerging U.S.-Russian axis succeeds in forcing a bad peace on Ukraine, Moscow will resume its info-war effort to undermine Ukrainian identity while promoting other politics, Quisling politics. How resilient would Ukrainian society be in such a poor outcome to the war? I want to bundle that with a couple other questions about if this shift in U.S. policy to other powers, is it long? Is it real? Does Russia think this is a long-term shift? Is there a Russian quid pro quo? Those are questions from Michael Gellner. Just below that question, and an anonymous attendee asking about the US and Trump not valuing Europe as a friend, but world leaders from Europe still trying to extend friendship and allyship to Trump. So I see I'm perhaps arbitrarily and unfairly lumping these questions together as what about these big changes in the world order? Are they lasting? Are they not lasting?
Let me
Quick
take
thoughts?
the
Yes.
question about Ukrainian identity. Yeah, since I'm kind of an
Okay.
expert on that. I believe as long as there remains such entity as Ukraine, whatever borders it has, there will be a strong Ukrainian identity. And if there is this perception of an unfair peace imposed on us, this identity will be even stronger. It might be even become revanchist. I don't know. But definitely there will be no sense of a sense of not important Ukrainian identity. Ukrainian Russian brothers or whatever. Let's make further concessions to Russians on language and so on. So there will be a strong perception that Ukraine should be united. Ukraine should be strong. Ukraine should be Western oriented. So I believe as long as there is something called Ukraine, as there is independent entity called Ukraine, even if it's truncated, its identity will remain strong.
Mikhail.
Yeah, I totally agree with Volodya, but I would just wanted to add one thing because on the territories that Russia has occupied, they have basically been conducting kind of cultural genocide. Because if you watch how the lengths to which they go to pretty much exterminate Ukrainian identity, they take the children, they tell them that they're Russian, they burn the books in Ukrainian or Ukrainian textbooks in school libraries, and obviously for that kind of project to succeed on the entire territory of Ukraine, Putin would have to take over and impose some kind of super draconian government. So as long as Volodya says, most of Ukraine stays, that will remain. But you have to understand those horrific developments out there.
Thank you.
Yeah.
There was a question asked early that I want to make sure each of our panelists gets a chance to respond to. And then for those that can stay, we can see about staying to answer more questions, because I hate the idea that someone's question doesn't get answered, and we still have more than 100 attendees.
I have to go, unfortunately.
Okay, I had a feeling
I can
that you
stay.
did.
No.
I can stay.
Okay. Oh, fantastic.
Okay.
Well, so the question I want to make sure everyone can answer is from Kate Havik. It's the second question in the Q&A now. And her question is, how do you suggest regular Americans support Ukraine to demonstrate our concern and appreciation for the unity of Ukraine and autonomy of your country as it was before the invasion began? And I think this is a question a lot of Americans have. It's not a secret that American politics is highly polarized right now. So not all Americans, but many Americans have this question about how to support Ukraine best now. So I was hoping that each of our panelists would answer this.
Yeah,
Yeah,
let
if
me
I may.
start.
Okay.
Okay.
Sure. Go ahead.
Okay. Well, yeah, go ahead.
No, I only said want to say that, of course, right now Trump has a ball. He has an initiative. He feels that he has a mandate, that he can push through the policy that he is doing down the throats of Ukrainians and Americans. And of course, the opposition has been disorganized, and still not quite came back to senses since election debacle. But now there's a new situation emerging because, for instance, the opportunity to criticize Trump for what he is doing towards Ukraine is becoming, I think, one of the pillars that the opposition, the Democratic Party, can actually unite around, in addition to certain issues dealing with domestic situation, the economy, and so on, healthcare and other things. they can use, of course, this argument that throwing Ukraine under the bus is something which is not should be what should be done, because Republicans actually used the awkward and clumsy withdrawal from Afghanistan in 2021 by Biden as a major talking point against him. But if Trump indeed throws Ukraine under the bus, that would be Afghanistan multiplied 10 or 20. I mean, that's going to be, not because I'm not saying that not because I'm Ukrainian, I'm from Ukraine and that's my home. I'm really thinking in terms of impact on the world affairs. So that needs to be reminded to Trump. But his view of greatness of America, Misha, I don't think is similar to what we expect. And I think that he came to power, to do exactly what he's doing. I'm one of those Ukrainian experts who have been for months and months now saying that's exactly what I'm expecting Trump to do. It's still hard to see it, hurtful and hard, for me to watch it, but that's a compelling of Ukraine to peace by any means.
May I quickly do a couple of rapid fire before I go? And I would pick a couple of questions.
The question again is how
there are
Americans
actually
can
two
support
questions
Ukraine.
in somewhat related. One is the first one. It's about the Ukraine-Russia Treaty on Friendship, Cooperation, and Partnership. Very rapid fire here. It's in the same place where the Budapest Memorandum is, when Ukraine gave up its third largest arsenal of nuclear weapons in the world. It's in the same place where a lot of other border treaties, they were very specific border treaties and demarcation treaties signed to complete post-Soviet, sovereignty, etc. So that's unfortunately the pattern. And to that, Dmytro Potechin, who says what must happen to America and Trump to make him realize his assumptions about making deals with Putin are wrong. Actually, I was going to address that is the world in which the United States aligns itself to divide spheres of influence with states like Russia and China will be not eventually in the American national interest, because it will be dealing based on interests and relative power rather than common values. And if the United States, the second the United States gets a bit weaker, and the second Putin senses that the United States is weaker, there will be moves against us. For the example I will give you of the kind of event that would signal that would be when Russia went to Syria and the international coalition did not contain its support for Assad. And then you had Wagner Group trying to seize Conoco oil fields. And we had to blast them and kill 300 Russians to stop them doing it. So those kinds of actions around the world will mount if Putin gets his terms in Ukraine. And if the United States pursues that kind of realist balancing act. And I think that's what that's the threat, the long term, that hopefully that's if what we as an academics can do, this is one of those arguments, one of those lines of thoughts that I believe are important to bring to the discussion, and even people who are completely in Trump orbit, to have them think about those things twice.
Thank you. And as moderator, I have to point out we're right at the top of the hour. Volodymyr Kulik, would you like to?
Bye, Mishko. I wanted to come back to that important question: what Americans can do to kind of limit the harm that Trump is doing with regard to Ukraine. There is one level, which is to donate to Ukrainian charities or Ukrainian NGOs collecting money for military equipment or healthcare supplies or whatever, or even weapons. But there is more fundamental and more important, both to Ukraine and to the US, which is to prevent Trump from throwing Ukraine under the bus. You should stop him from dismantle American democracy. because his dismantling of the Western security, of old security architecture, is closely related to his dismantling of American democracy. As long as Ukraine is, as long as the U.S. is functional, robust democracy with strong institutions and checks and balances, it is doomed to remain part of the Western alliances. Yeah, and it is doomed to be preoccupied with preserving the norms-based international order. And if Trump succeeds is dismantling American democracy and the U.S. becomes just another authoritarian state, then of course there is no hope for its support in Ukraine.
Thank you. And so I want to get to at least a few of these questions. We still have quite a large audience. And so one question is from Stephen Vandelerschot, who asks, even though much of the discussion has been on the actions and statements of the Trump administration, how do you think we should view the recent statements from Friedrich Merz and the incoming German government, which seems much more supportive of Ukraine than the Scholz government?
Yeah, okay, let me take that. Can you hear me? Yeah, right. Yeah. I think Mayor's statements are actually interesting because he's being on a flank of European politicians who are the most angry about what Trump is doing about Ukraine. So that's interesting. It was to be expected a little bit in the sense of remembering what he was saying and his statements during the election campaign. But still, as we all know, it's one thing election campaigns, another thing when you are after the post-election period. And Merz seems to still cling to his guns in many ways, also not just rhetorically, because he now suggests a huge process and program of rearming Germany and spending more money on defense. We'll see if this will be actually implemented or not, because current Chancellor Scholz, of course, after February of 22, also announced the Zeitenwende, the major change in turn in Germany's policy. And let's be fair, Germany helped Ukraine a lot, but still, we didn't see the term, the Zeitenwende, which was promised. And unfortunately, a lot of people were disappointed with Chancellor Scholz for that matter. And we have to wait for the government to be formed because it's going to be still a coalition government. Will Merz actually be able to, to monopolize foreign policy or not? Basically, Merz said that we should just dissociate with this United States. He's not expecting anything good coming out of Washington, unlike still like Macron and Starmer, who are willing to work with US. So that's interesting, but I wouldn't say that the influence of people like Starmer, Macron, and Trump is huge, or we shouldn't over exaggerate it or overestimate it, because they came recently to Washington and talked to Trump, and some people said, "Oh yeah, well maybe they convinced him that Ukraine should be supported," and then right then, next on the heels of those meetings, there was a Friday meeting with Zelensky. So they probably didn't convince him. So we'll see where it goes. And Americans can do what they're doing. I mean, all Americans can continue doing what they've been doing if they tend to support Ukraine and giving money for fundraisers and charity organizations, including Razum and many others. Of course, like I said, the initiative now is in the hands of Trump, and he is not necessarily pro-Ukrainian, let's put it mildly, and we've been seeing it actually for years and years. And by the way, this is not the first time that he's suspending military aid to Ukraine. There was 2019, right. Of course, when he suspended for several months. Trump was the reason for a half a year delay with approving a aid package last year. So from the end of 23 to the April of 24, he was the main reason. Some Ukrainians tend to not understand that. They tend to blame Biden for that. But Trump was the main reason, of course, that was blocked until it was actually allowed to proceed with the voting. And
blocked
I think
by people
that
in Congress who were, just to explain in case someone had, it was blocked by people in Congress who were following the prompting of Trump, who was not in office at the time, but was,
Okay, all right. So
okay. And then we have a question specifically for Volodymyr Kulik. Can Ukrainian identity be anti-American but still pro-Western?
Great question.
In principle, it can. there is already an emergent anti-American element, meaning that the attitude toward the U.S. Has deteriorated perceptibly in the last couple of days. Yeah, but definitely for Ukrainians on a longer term, definitely the U.S. is part of the collective West. And Ukrainians understand that Ukraine should have any help and any support, any understanding in the West it can get. So definitely Ukrainians understand that it would be counterproductive to try to drive a wedge between the U.S. and Europe. So we will hope for enough unity between the U.S. and Europe for us to be able to rely on that. We should be prepared for anti-European, anti-democratic kind of trajectory of the U.S. Fortunately, we have Europe. Unfortunately, we don't yet know how much how much support we can get from Europe, how strong their deeds will be after their current strong words. But definitely, Ukrainian identity in the foreseeable future will remain pro-Western, meaning both pro-European and pro-American and pro-Canadian and pro whatever part of the West remains on after this debacle Trump is making now.
There's another question about domestic issues in Ukraine that I think is good for Volodymyr Kulik from Lila Vasquez, who is still here in the meeting with us. What about national opposition in Ukraine? Are there still pro-Russian political forces operating?
Overt pro-Russianness is impossible at the moment. There is martial law. There is prosecution of any activities in favor of the enemy as long as the war goes on. There is some support for a kind of more balanced policies between the West and Russia and so on, but it is hidden now. It might reemerge after the war. And in the first campaign we have after the war, there will be some sentiment. So let's not be so anti-Russian. Let's not be so unilaterally, kind of unidimensionally pro-Western. Let's not underestimate the complexity of the world and the diversity of Ukrainian population and everything. But I believe these voices, at least in the near future, they will not be strong and not be influential. So the trauma of Russian aggression, of Russian betrayal, is still so strong, is so fresh. That for the time being, the greater danger is Ukrainian disunity. So not so strong pro-Russian opposition or some, but kind of narcissism of minor differences. You know that we start arguing with each other among some minor issues and we'll lose our precious unity. But as long as the war goes on, and especially as long as attacks from Russia are accompanied by attacks from the US, we will retain that unity.
Yeah, thank you. There's a question from Yehor Bralian who asked this half an hour, 40 minutes ago. Thank you for your patience and is still in the meeting. How do you see what is your perspective on two topics? And Yehor is asking about Russian propaganda in the US in the context of framing, I think, US public opinion about Ukraine among Americans. So your view on Russian propaganda in the US in the context of framing public opinion about Ukraine among Americans and how this changes Ukraine's security alliances.
Okay, I can answer that. I mean, Thank you, Igor. And actually, it's quite heartening that we still have 65 people here, even though we're going over time. So that's
And people
quite
with questions are still in the
yeah,
meeting,
that's
kind
quite
of waiting.
touching, and of course, that's a reflection of people's interest in the subject, and that's great. That's really heartening. So on this Igor Brylyan's question, I should say that Russian propaganda played a role. It's hard to quantify. That was always an academic problem. Like, how can you quantify? How can you count how much of actual influence Russia had? It definitely did have influence in 2016. It interfered in US elections in that year. And then we, of course, may remember how then in Helsinki, Putin and Trump were meeting, and Trump was agreeing with Putin, trusting him publicly that he said Russia did not interfere, and distrusting publicly US intelligence community who said that he did interfere. And then ever since they never stopped trying. All this trolls factory has been working full time, 24/7. But it's sometimes hard to distinguish, of course, where it's Russian propaganda or where it's something homegrown, domestic, the grassroots. Sometimes Russia is being more creative now, since there is more projects and activities directed and trying to decipher Russian propaganda. But then they would put it through the intermediaries. They would spread the news to some kind of media source, for instance, in Africa, and then they will be picked up in US and something like that. So they're more sophisticated now, the Russians, what they're doing. So I guess we will see more of this influence going forward. A lot of times when you see on social media and Twitter, for instance, when you see people commenting, and they pretend to be Americans, but you never know. And sometimes actually the slip of a tongue, you notice, oh, maybe this person is not really American, even though his name is like John Jones or something. So it will continue. It will continue. And maybe very briefly, I think that, all questions were great, but the Oscar goes, in my opinion, to the previous one. Can Ukraine be anti-American but pro-Western? I think it can. And I think, regrettably, for many of my American friends, it should. If things continue to develop the way they're developing in terms of US foreign policy and domestic policy. Maybe we should be the safeguard. People have already been showing quite interesting meme, this picture where you have motherland defending Ukraine monument in Kiev, and also the Liberty statue, kind of together, one casting shadow on another. I understand it not only in security or geopolitics way, but also in terms of defense of democracy. Ukraine is also the front line in defending democracy. And if democracy is under threat in US, eventually then Ukraine may continue to play a major role even in helping US in that respect. So yes, pro-Western, pro-liberal democratic values, principles, rules, norms, division of power, separation of power, for instance, transparency, and other things. Of course, Ukraine should continue to go that way.
Yeah.
We now have suspended democracy in some ways because of the war. It's martial law, but we never gave up on democracy, and I think it's our strong feature. And most Ukrainians don't want to give up on democracy going forward, and they are very anxious and impatient to wait for the end of the war, and actually have democracy fully restored. And have elections and free and fair elections, and vote for whoever. And some people now think that Zelensky should actually say thank you to some of those attacks from Washington in terms of his domestic political standing, because his ratings are going down because Ukrainians are upset about how he was treated in the White House. But I don't know. I don't think this question was answered, and I answered the question which wasn't asked. So please go ahead.
Well, I think what's telling though about your answer there is I think we're just starting to see the beginning of Americans realizing what a break with Europe would be, because that's been such a long-standing
Yeah,
set of allies not that the
right.
United States has had. Dmitry Potekin asked a
Hmm.
question 45 minutes ago and is still in the
Right.
meeting. When Zelensky tried to bribe Putin by signing the gas deal in 2019, he was thinking and acting quite the same way Trump is thinking and acting now. It took him the full-scale war and thousands of Ukrainians killed to understand he was wrong. What, if anything, must happen to America and Trump to make him realize his assumptions about making deals with Putin are wrong? So there's a lot packed into that question. I think that's actually more than one question,
Hmm.
because there's a lot in there.
Yeah,
But Volodymyr, who would-
let me start with
Yeah.
the Zelensky part.
Okay.
So yes, it's a bitter irony that Zelensky is now accused of being a warmonger. Yeah, while in fact he came to power under the slogan of "Let's just stop." Stop shooting. Yeah, so he wanted to. He actually accused Poroshenko of being unwilling to stop the war in the Donbass, and he promised to quickly make a deal with Putin and to stop the war. And then he even agreed to unilateral withdrawal of troops on the front line, on the line of contact in the Donbass. And he didn't actually prepare Ukraine for the full-scale war because he didn't believe in it. So Ukrainians remember a lot about Zelensky's kind of wrongdoing in this respect, and when the election is held after the war, many will remind him. But Zelensky has realized fully, belatedly, but fully, that Putin doesn't want peace, that Putin wants Ukraine. Putin is not afraid of NATO advance as he claims, but he's afraid of Ukraine's independence and Ukrainian democracy. And if Trump was so preoccupied with listening to what his society thinks, and if he was so preoccupied with protection of American democracy and American role in the world, he would realize that Putin is not willing to make a deal, that Putin is not wanting to make concessions, that Putin's will advance and attack. The problem is that Trump is not necessarily willing to protect America as it is. He wants to transform it to fit his interests, and that might be not incompatible with what Putin is doing. So it seems like Trump doesn't really care about having America strong in the world, as long as his role in America and the world is strong. And Putin can play on that. So and I don't know whether Trump himself realizes that Putin is indeed the enemy and Putin is indeed a threat, but maybe a considerable part of Trump voters realize at some point that it is not possible to make a deal with Putin which will not be dangerous for the West and the US.
And a follow-up to that, which I think might have a quick answer, Ibrahim Muradov asked, don't you think that through his latest message, Zelensky is also striving to clarify that he is not the obstacle to peace, as he's recently been accused of being?
Definitely, he wants to signal that. The problem is that the Trump and Vance and their entourage do not want to listen to that. Because they benefit from presenting Zelensky as an obstacle, because they do not want to present Putin as an obstacle. That's the problem. That's so shocking and so harmful.
Okay.
Yeah, if I may pick up here.
Sure.
Can I? Yeah,
Sure.
briefly, right where Volodya left, because you actually have two Volodymyrs here today, and actually another one, Volodymyr, is in Kiev, so they're the power of three, I suppose, the one being Zelensky. So, but seriously speaking, I think that's a big question. Like, why is all this pressure and squeezing is on Ukraine? Why there is nothing that we see on Russia? You know, if Trump pretends to be so neutral and fair and balanced, like why wouldn't he press Russia? You know, and he is not. And people have been asking questions, American journalists, for days now, like where are the proof of some concessions and compromise that Russia is ready to make in the process, in this peace process. There are none. Normally, the answer would be like, "Oh, they are actually making some." But apparently, the only concession in the view of the current White House is that Russia is ready to sign the capitulation act of Ukraine. But you know what? We would have been able to sign this anytime now, without fighting for 3 years. In this difficult war, very hard war with Russia, we didn't need Trump to sign a surrender or capitulation act, so we don't want it, and therefore that's a problem. What Misha said, that maybe Trump would come to understand that working with Putin is not rewarding, but I don't think so. And some people in Ukraine, I should explain to our audience, and maybe some people know it already, is we're actually fed up with Biden, with his spoon feeding of Ukraine over the last 3 years, to the extent that they said, okay, let's have a change. Let's have this unpredictable, unconventional politician guy, deal maker Trump in place. I never was among those people, and I was surprised that people would actually subscribe to this point of view. What is happening is exactly what I expected, that you have a weak link here in his view, that's Ukraine, and you can talk to Ukraine down, you can actually see it as an object, not having any agency, and Russia is a great country. So have you seen how the Americans were talking to Russia in Riyadh in the first round of negotiations in Saudi Arabia? And you compare it to how they talk down to Zelensky in Oval Office. So that's reflecting their view, like Ukraine just needs a little pushing here and there, and then they'll be ready to sign whatever. But we don't want to sign whatever. That's the point. We can sign the rare earth deal. We can maybe do something else. But I'm afraid it's going to be impasse in terms of this huge gap I already mentioned earlier before, how Trump sees his priority here and how Ukraine sees it. And to the Dimas Potekin question, also, I don't think Trump would ever recognize or admit or even realize that he's made mistakes trusting Putin. I think that's really a reversible process. There's no cure to that. He just tends to believe everything Putin says. It's almost like a psychological zombie-like kind of dependence that he has on a guy. And we can remember again how Trump looked in Helsinki, in Hamburg in the first 4 years, and how he actually was cuddling with Putin without advisors, without translators, interpreters. That was a big problem back then, and we are seeing continuation, except that in the previous 4 years, like I said, there were guardrails, there were generals, there was deep state and everything, and none of that is really there right now, which would be restraining Trump's impulse to go full speed ahead in relations with Russia.
I think we have time for one last question. I've prioritized the questions that have come in from named attendees that I can tell are still in the meeting. So my apologies if you're an anonymous attendee here who didn't get your question asked. But if the panelists are up for it, because we have one last question.
Go
okay.
ahead.
So from Margarita Balmaceda, who I believe is still here, yes, is still in the attendees. How can the Ukrainian leadership, under pressure for the signing of a very dubious minerals agreement and no longer harboring any illusions of goodwill from the Trump administration, balance disappointment and what could be very well justified rage with the very practical need to be on the administration's good favors to rescue even a bit of aid? How would domestic opposition groups respond to this? I think this is a very good question about balancing the practical need to be diplomatic with domestic responses. And so would either of you like to, Volodymyr Kulik?
Yeah,
would you like to jump in
let
first?
me start. So I believe there is no danger for Zelensky in being attacked by the opposition or some part of society for kind of betraying Ukrainian interests. First, among knowledgeable people, there is understanding that this agreement currently is just an agreement about intention to negotiate further. So it's not yet any binding agreement about actual kind of concessions or whatever. Second, even if it is about final agreement about actual mineral resources, there is understanding that it is not necessarily harmful to us. It can be even beneficial to us if there are American investment and there is American interest in peaceful condition for extracting those minerals, and there is an understanding that Ukraine cannot afford refusing that, and even opposition is not going to attack Zelensky for such a for such an agreement, for such a concession. So I believe Zelensky made clear that he has red lines, and these red lines are accepted by the active part of Ukrainian society and the Ukrainian political class. So he's not seen as kind of traitor in the making. Yeah. So there is no fear so far that he can give up too much. There is understanding that he is under immense pressure, and it is very hard for him to find the right way. His role and his effort is appreciated, and as I mentioned at the beginning, there is consolidation around him, renewed consolidation. But he's acutely aware that the Ukrainian society is watching, that the opposition is watching, and he knows that his place in Ukrainian society and in Ukrainian history depends on the choices he makes. And I believe he will not do what is understandably bad for Ukraine, although he of course can make a mistake.
Okay. Couple sentences here, maybe in the end. No.
Yes, sure. I
Yeah,
would
yeah,
love that.
sure,
We
sure.
still
Right.
have nearly, not quite half our, we have about half our attendees have stayed half an hour over on
Right.
this session to listen
Right.
and ask questions. So thank you to
That's
all
great.
of you
That's great.
for being here.
Wonderful.
So
Yeah,
if
wonderful
you'd like to
audience.
make a quick closing statement, we are about half an
Yeah.
hour past.
Yes,
Thank you.
yes,
And
very
thank you to
quick.
you two for doing this and staying
Sure.
so long is remarkable.
Very quickly
Yeah.
on the situation we find ourselves in. I mean, apparently there will be the rare earth deal signed today, which is great. You know, so going forward, even though Ukraine doesn't really need that deal, you know, the dark irony actually, and is that Ukraine didn't want it. Zelensky didn't want it. I mean, yes, he was the one who suggested that those rare earth minerals can be, you know, explored together with Americans, because he was looking for ways to interest Trump when it was clear that Trump might return to the White House. But no one in Ukraine expected that there will be some kind of this kind of neo-imperialist, neo-colonialist offer being brought to Zelensky and also like signed right away. And he didn't sign right away, and that was a good thing. So Ukraine wanted to sign it only as a favor, political favor to Trump. So the irony is that Zelensky is coming to Washington, ready to sign that deal that Trump wants, because he wants to show something to his audience and his electorate that, see, I'm just in the White House for 1 month and I'm already having this deal signed by Ukraine. And instead, Ukraine, you know, he's backstabbed and ambushed in the Oval Office. So that's a problem. I mean, you know, one thing will be taken away from agenda, that will sign that deal. Maybe the 8 hopefully will be unfrozen. But going forward, I'm still not optimistic. Because I think the view on a quick peace deal, regardless of the quality of the peace, you know, on the side of Trump administration, is quite different from what Ukrainians were hoping to get.
Volodymyr Kulik, would you like to make a final statement?
Yeah, no. It is a difficult time for both Ukraine and the US. Unfortunately, Americans decided on the fourth year of the war to open the second front, so to say, yeah, and against Ukraine. So it is a very surprising and regrettable development. But like I said, Trump is waging the war not only on Ukraine. He's waging the war on democracies worldwide, including in the US. And so he should be constrained, ideally defeated, yeah, but at least constrained, and both by the common European-Ukrainian effort and by the effort of American society and American political class and American business elites. So to our attendees in the US, there is a lot of work for you to do. Support Ukraine, encourage your politicians not to abandon Ukraine, but also do your best to preserve American democracy. And if American democracy is preserved and American alliance with Europe is preserved, then hopefully this united effort to help Ukraine will help us to defeat Putin, or at least not let him win.
Thank you. Дякую, дуже дякую. And thank you to all of you who are attendees. Thank you to Volodymyr Kulik and Volodymyr Dubovik, who on a very last minute notice joined and then stayed for an hour and a half, not an hour.
And thank you, Sarah.
Thank you, Sarah, for organizing
Yeah,
this.
yeah,
Oh, well,
right,
there's a very
right.
least I can do. I was very happy
right.
to do it and honored to
Right.
do it.
Right.
And so thank you to all of you. There's information in the chat. You are also welcome to check out the Ponars Eurasia website. There's a Ponars Ukraine task force, of which the three of us are members. We're not the only members. It's a larger group, but just a tremendous thank you to all of you today for doing this. And be well.
Right, from us as well. Героям слава. Bye-bye.
Героям слава.